Welcome to the April 19th meeting of the Murfreesboro City Council. Councilmember Rick LaLance has our prayer and our pledge.
All right, if you bow your heads. Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for all the blessings in our lives. Lord, we don't take any of them for granted, and we hope that you'll be with us tonight in the decisions we have to make. We always work hard for you, and we'll keep that up tonight. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You're the man, Rick. Chief Folks is not here, and I don't see Chief Bowen, but I do see our Fire Marshal Carl Pease there. But I do want to say that the Guns and Hoses basketball game was on Saturday, and the fire department won again this year, so they're 2-0 despite of some horrible officiating. But it was a great turnout. There's a couple hundred people there for a good cause. So, and this year no one got hurt. So you can let HR and Richard Rucker know that there's no insurance claims coming this year. So, except for some egos, those definitely got hurt. All right, we have Mr. Greg Tucker here, who's our Rutherford County historian. Mr. Tucker, the podium is yours.
Well, I want to share with you tonight two situations where some of our finest here in this community were called upon to respond to very challenging situations in neighboring communities. The first one was in 1934 in Shelbyville, Bedford County. An incident started when a 14-year-old girl alleged that she had been attacked by a young man. The alleged attack occurred on the high school grounds, one of the rural high schools in Bedford County, over on the western side of Bedford County. There were no witnesses. She was on her way back from the school outhouse to the main building when an attack allegedly occurred. The accused was arrested and taken in for questioning, and he admitted to call it an attack, but said that he meant no harm and no harm was done. But some of the family of the victim, alleged victim, a white girl, the accused was a black male, began to stir things up. And the accused was being held in the courthouse, the jail in the courthouse, and a crowd began to gather. And it was apparent to the police and the sheriff's department that the crowd was likely to start demanding that the accused be handed over to them. As the crowd was gathering, the officials in Shelbyville called the state and asked for help. The state authorities quickly activated the National Guard unit in Rutherford County. Now, the National Guard unit in Rutherford County in 1934 was really quite an elite unit. They had been decorated and acclaimed for their service during World War I. Some of the World War veterans were in charge of the unit. And the call went out, and about 100 young men from the community immediately reported to the armory over on Old Nashville Pike. They were armed, dressed out, put in vehicles, and headed down the pike to Shelbyville. They got there in time to encircle the courthouse with arms in hand. And about 100 in the unit. By that time, though, the crowd, heavily lubricated with alcohol, had built to about 600, 500 to 600, demanding that the accused be turned over to them. The crowd pressed forward, and at one point, several of the guardsmen were knocked to the ground, and the order was given to fire. The intent was to fire over the crowd to cause them to fall back, but some of those that had been knocked down fired directly into the crowd. The crowd did fall back, several being wounded, pulled back the injured, in the mob. And the guard unit, the Rutherford Guard unit, quickly realized that they could not withstand another rush. They retreated into the courthouse. The leadership quickly got their heads together and decided that a retreat was their only option. They made their plan. They rushed out of the courthouse, different directions to vehicles that fortunately had been left convenient, made their way back to Murfreesboro. The mob, when they realized that the guard was gone and also found the courthouse empty, they burned the courthouse. They burned the courthouse to the ground. I have some elderly friends in our community who remember visiting the next day and seeing the ruins of the courthouse. Curious sidelight, the crowd, of course, at that point disappeared, and a local dentist organized a beneficial vigilante group and took control of the city to keep it peaceful until the governor sent in 4 units from different areas to take over and control the city. The sheriff and his family had left for Georgia, never to be seen again. When the men came back to Rutherford County, they went to the armory, checked in their equipment. It was by then late at night, and a number of them gathered over at the 24-hour cafe on the south side of the square, City Cafe, and began sharing stories. And a newspaper man from the local paper was with them at the time. And as they told their stories and confirmed that some blood had been shed, when I mentioned, well, at least we accomplished our mission. There was no extrajudicial execution, sometimes called a lynching. The reason, when they retreated, they took the accused with them, dressed out in guard fatigues, and brought him to Murfreesboro, and then he was transferred to Nashville. The rest of the story is basically 2 months later he was tried in Nashville and was convicted of an attempted rape. But our unit did their job, and something we'd be proud of. Second incident was in February 1946. And across the country, following the war and the return of the veterans, there was a lot of tension. Some of it was intergenerational, some of it was racial. In Columbia, Tennessee, in the Mink Slide neighborhood of Columbia, Tennessee, there were quite a number of veterans who were chafing at the way they were treated despite their service. And the incident that triggered the real concerns was a confrontation between a woman and a retailer on the edge of that community. The woman was accompanied by her son, who was a veteran. In the confrontation, the shopkeeper began to get a little rough, trying to force someone to leave. The veteran stepped up and defended his mother and literally threw the shopkeeper through the window. Immediately, police were called in, and immediately a crowd began to gather, and the police realized once again that they were overwhelmed and called for help. Problem in 1946, though, there were no National Guard units. They were all still on active duty. So the call again came to Rutherford County, and they activated what was called the Home Guard unit. When the National Guard was activated and pulled out, our community organized a Home Guard unit made up of those that were too old, too young, or for some reason unable to serve in the active military. They were armed and equipped with World War I material. They loaded up. But when they loaded up, they added one piece of equipment. They had one heavy piece of equipment, an armored personnel carrier. They loaded it up on a wagon and hauled it down to Columbia. They rolled the personnel carrier off into the middle of the community. Now, it didn't have a cannon, but it had a mounted machine gun turret, and it had, what would you call them, portholes, so it's bristling with small. And the riot went home. Both sides just disappeared, and the night was peaceful. So once again, the unit from Rutherford County helped out and quieted things in a neighboring community. There's an easy lesson here. When you're called out to meet a challenge, be sure you have enough firepower. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Tucker.
And I think in 2017, we proved that we did have enough firepower when the community asked for a response in reaction to a group that was going to visit Murfreesboro. I think firepower was what deterred the situation and made it work out so that everybody got up the next morning and said Murfreesboro loves. So, also, I heard you speak last week talking about the history of the capital of Tennessee in Murfreesboro's earlier days, and I'd love to hear that story again because it was very educational. I think all of us are pretty well set that Murfreesboro was the capital of Tennessee, and certainly from your historical perspective, it shed a new light on it.
See you next month.
Thank you.
All right. All right, you have the consent agenda in front of you. Item E has been withdrawn, so item E1A has been withdrawn. Item EB is still on the consent agenda.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll move into second readings. We'll consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 18019, amending Murfreesboro City Code Chapter 2 Administration by adding a new section 218 authorizing the city to accept proceeds of the sale of property seized and forfeited pursuant to Tennessee Code Section 3911701 and limiting to the use of such funds for law enforcement.
So moved.
Second. Motion is second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 180Z14 to rezone an area along Medical Center Parkway to mixed-use MU District and Gateway Design Overlay 3 GDO 3 District.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 180Z15 to amend the conditions applicable to approximately 130 acres in the PUD district located along Fortress Boulevard and Franklin Road, Victory Station PUD.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 180Z16 to amend the conditions applicable to approximately 48.21 acres in the planned signage overlay PSO district located along Old Fort Parkway and Stones River Mall Boulevard, Stones River Mall PSO.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move into first readings. We have a letter from the Assistant Planning Director regarding Ordinance 17OZ62.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of council. This item, pull it up here, pull up a map for you. This was property that you had a public hearing on January the 25th, I believe. At that meeting, the applicant voluntarily requested deferral. The crux of this application is a PRD amendment to essentially go back to what it was zoned for in 2000. This is part of the Victory Station PUD. It was zoned for multifamily uses, 176 multifamily units back in 2000. Never developed. In 2015, Mr. Swanson requested an amendment to the plan development for an assisted living facility with 176 units. That ended up being constructed on the parcel to the south, and so Mr. Swanson is back with an amendment to parcel F, which is the area colored in blue, that would kind of be a mixture between the old and the existing zoning for the property. It would continue to allow 176 units if approved, but it would be allowed to be senior apartments, assisted living, apartments, or townhomes. So it would open it up to a few more uses, including the ones that it was approved for back in 2000 and the ones that it's currently zoned for, that it was zoned for back in 2015. The applicant, the reason for the request of his deferral is he wanted to give time for the multifamily zoning ordinance amendment to pass, and that passed second reading earlier this month. That was to limit new apartment developments or rezonings for apartments to just planned developments. And so that passed second and final reading, and so he requested for this PUD amendment to be brought back before the City Council for consideration on first reading. I'll be happy to answer any questions. We already conducted the public hearing, so no additional public hearing is necessary. Mr. Matt Taylor of SEC is here representing Mr. Swanson, if you have any questions for him.
Any questions for the applicant?
Matthew, this was originally multifamily, then changed, and then going back, right?
Yes, sir. And the reason for the change in 2015 was for the assisted living facility that ended up going on the property to the south. The assisted living facility decided not to go on this property because of some suspected environmental conditions, and so they ended up rezoning the property to the south. And Mr. Swanson and his team have since, according to them, have cleared the site from environmental concerns, and now they would like to be able to market this property.
No other questions. I move for approval.
I'll second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, we'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 18OZ08 to zone an area along Asbury Road as planned unit development PUD district simultaneous with annexation 2017-449. Is there anything left to be presented? Has there been any changes in the PUD?
I'll go ahead and bring this up. We've had a couple of conversations in the last week, and one of the things, a couple of things I want to make sure and get kind of on the record. I think this will be with Mr. Taylor. We talked last week about that Asbury entrance, that once the place was opened and the new road opened,
Yes, sir.
it would be simultaneous. That the back entrance would be a gated entrance and not for use by general public.
Absolutely.
Is that somewhere in the plan book? Is that, or does it need, I just want to make sure that's kind of a.
We will put that text in there.
For
We
second
can certainly.
reading?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that'd be good. Also, we've talked a little bit, and we can get into as much of this as we need to tonight, but one of the things after a whole lot of discussions and trying to figure all this out, I had talked to Mr. Taylor about trying to reduce the size of the warehouses. And I think what we talked about is trying to kind of, get as much as we could where the company is still able to do what they are, but change the aesthetic view from the interstate, also reduce the volume of the warehouses. And was that number at 56 feet? So we're going to drop off about 15% that
Yes.
you guys had.
Yes, sir.
You guys willing to do that, to put that in there?
Yes, sir. We can change that in our book as well.
All right. Anybody got any questions? I'll kind of wrap up by saying a couple things about this. I asked for the deferral. Thanks, Mr. Taylor. I asked for the deferral last week and said that I'd go to take a look for myself, and I did. I went to 2 distilleries on Sunday and then went back to one of them on Tuesday evening. Just because it was a kind of rainy day and I couldn't get to, it were closed, so I couldn't get to where I was going to go. At the end of the day, I just have to say that when what I was looking for was to see if once I got 200 or 300 yards away, which is closer than where this neighborhood is, did it look like kind of everything was covered in this black stuff? And my answer was just no. And I know there's pictures, and I've gotten pictures. I've taken a bunch of pictures. I'm not necessarily going to show them to you tonight. I sent them up here, but I took. The fact of the matter is, I just started going around and looking. Once I got a eighth of a mile away from the distillery, which is 4 or 5 times bigger than what this one's going to be, I'd see maybe a sign that had some stuff on it. So I could have taken that picture, but right next to it was a sign that didn't have it, and there was another sign that didn't have it. So it was, if you walk around Murfreesboro or drive around Murfreesboro, I took 3 pictures this morning of just on my way to work of houses that had it on there, or there was a school portable building and it was covered in it. And I'm not convinced that that's coming from Tullahoma or Lynchburg. I mean, that's just the fact. And so when I go out a little distance, it just did not look like the stuff was just covered in black, and so I just don't believe that that's what's going to happen. And I'll say this, I've been saying this for 3 months. There were 3 things that were on my list that, in order for me to take away a person's property rights by not giving them the capability to sell their property for what they want to sell it for, there were 3 things. Number 1 was it was not harmful. And that's, I think everybody's found that that it's not harmful. The neighbors, I think, have found that too, that we get the road done, and that's been done. And the third thing was that I wanted to have some idea somehow that it's not going to cover all the houses in the neighborhood in black. And I put my own 2 eyes on it, and it's not real scientific. And people from the other side didn't think maybe I could make a good enough judgment on my own. The neighbors might think I'm not making a good enough judgment on my own, but it's what I saw, and that's all I can go with. So there was another issue that the only other thing that was on kind of my list that came up after the public hearing was about the fires, and I had asked sort of how that's going to work out. I didn't want a bunch of ash and all that stuff blowing over on the neighboring neighborhood either. And so I think Mr. Pease, is he here? Yeah. Would you mind coming up? And I've gotten an answer on this, but I think it's important for everybody to hear this, kind of what we found out here as far as what to expect there. In my mind, I was thinking bonfire party, and I think it's just not quite like that. So will you please explain to us kind of what we think we should expect and what we have in place already as a city to control some of those things, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, and the council. I spoke in length today with a Mr. John Lunn from Sazerac and wanted to find out from them what exactly their process was. Currently, we have burning requirements here in Murfreesboro, and I'll give you a little background on those. Typically, we have 3 types of fires. We have what's called a recreational fire, which is just parents and children in the backyard roasting marshmallows and hot dogs. We don't per se go out and look at those sites because it is a controlled, small, very small fire. The second one we have is kind of like what we call a bonfire, which some of the high schools do it for homecoming celebrations or big game celebrations. We actually do send people out to look at those to see how big they are, where they're at. The one where we have the most problems is in the open burning with construction sites. Now, when I say a construction site, it could be a single-family home construction site, or it could be a development, clearing of a lot of land. Typically, when we have the clearing problem, they knock the trees down, they take the trees, they pile them up, they push them all up with dozers and track hoes. A lot of dirt gets involved in it, a lot of dirt gets mixed with it. They use a petroleum-based product to light it, so the first initial light up, tremendous amount of black smoke. The problem is those type fires don't get a lot of air to them, and that's where we get the smoldering effect. We try to tell them to keep it stirred up, keep it stirred up. The more air that gets to it, the cleaner it burns, the better it burns, and the less smoke it produces. Sometimes that's hard, depending on the lay of the land. That's where we've had the most problems. When I talked to Mr. Lunn, I kind of went in depth with him. I said, tell me about your process. Tell me how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it. I think I knew where. I think it was going to be on the west side of what I'm going to call the lake or the quarry, which would be between the quarry and the interstate. And he told me, and talking with him, basically what they do is they buy their sugar maple from the same places that Jack Daniels and George Dickel buy theirs. It comes in a 2-inch by 2-inch by 48-inch long piece of wood. He used the example, and I wasn't familiar with the game, Jenga, where you stack the wood and something, you pull it out. I've never played it. I refer to it like stacking pallets, okay? What they do is when you stack those, you alternate the wood, which what that does, that opens and gives what we call a clear air vent. It's like if you have a stack of pallets, if you have 2 big trees laying beside each other and you go try to light it, it's never going to light. You take a stack of pallets and you put a torch to it for a couple minutes, with the airflow that comes in from all directions, it catches fire very quickly, and it burns very efficiently, very quickly. Very little smoke. So that's kind of how they do it. And I asked him, I said, how big are these stacks? And he said they actually burn what he called 4 stacks, or I called 4 pods. So if you can picture a 48-inch piece of wood stacked up about 6 foot high, 4 of them side by side by side. They try to light it, and there's a video on YouTube. It's called, I think it's called Sazerac Wood Burn. It's about a minute-long video, and you can see they use the propane torch to light it. They don't use any type of what I call an accelerant or a petroleum-based product, because that will affect the charcoal that they're using to run the whiskey through. I think that's not, it may not be the proper terminology. But what it does is they get it burning in the middle, and what happens is when they get it burning in the middle, it starts collapsing in, so it makes a pile. The video that I saw in talking with Mr. Lunn, they keep water on spraying on this because they don't want it to burn to an ash. If it gets to an ash stage, it's gone too far. So they control the fire with water. The video actually shows a long wand that once it all collapses, they push the wand into the charcoal to keep it fairly cool while it still smolders, but it's not flaming up. Very little smoke. That cooling keeps it in a charcoal form instead of an ash form. Like I said, if it gets to the ash, it's gone too far. They've wasted their product. So we talked about that for several minutes. He also told me, I said, here in Murfreesboro, we require that somebody be with the fire the entire time it's burning. He said the burning process usually lasts about 3 to 4 hours. I've made people stay overnight on some of the burns here in town on a big development because it would not go out. So he said it's about a 3 to 4 hour process. I asked him, I said, once you get done, what do you do with the product? Is it still hot? Is it still smoldering? He says, no, it has to be in a cool atmosphere because they have a silo that it's going to go in. So basically they do the burn, they cool it down with the water, they let it set, I believe he told me, for about a day or 2 before they transport that material to the silo. Or maybe it was a week. I may have that backwards. Is Mr. Lund here? Okay, did I have that backwards? I apologize if I do. I was trying to take notes on sticky notes.
Was it dry for a day or 2, and then move it under that pavilion if we want to build? Let it dry in there for about a week, and then into the silo?
Okay, I apologize. I had those backwards. So it actually sits outside for about 1 to 2 weeks. That way, and I asked him, I said, how much product does this make? And I equivalent to about 3 scoops of a backhoe, or what I call maybe 3 yards of mulch. That's what it makes. It does not go into the silo for at least 2 weeks, so there's no threat of fire in the silo. Of course, as y'all know, the worst case we could ever have is a silo fire. Last one we had, we was on that scene for 13 days.
Sledgecraft on.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, then I asked him, I said, well, okay, how much product do you keep on hand at any given time? And he said it would be no more than, I wrote down 8 stacks. I don't know if that was exactly right. But my concern was, where do you store them? And they want to store them where it's dry, so they don't have to buy the wood, keep it for another 6 weeks to dry out. They would bring it in, let it dry, and they only burn, according to Mr. Lunn, I think he said 8 to 10 times a year. Now, I did put in a call to Jack Daniels this afternoon, and I did not get a call back. I know they burn a lot more, but
I talked to the Moore County mayor, and they burn daily.
daily.
What he had said.
We got to talking a little bit. I said, I do know Jack Daniels has hood systems to catch smoke, anything debris that goes in the air. And they said that's a requirement from the state through the air permitting. They burn so much that Jack Daniels has to capture some of that. I believe the term Mr. Lund told me was a minor source permit is what Sazerac would be under, to where Jack Daniels would be under a major air source permitting. So it's a considerable difference in the amount. Mr. Lund also invited us, if all this goes through and works out, that we could be present on any burn we'd want to be, and we would. We want to be present to see exactly how it's done, where it's done. One of my concerns was that I couldn't tell from the pictures that I saw of the pavilion where this is at. I said, I really don't like the idea of burning anything under a pavilion. It won't be burning under a pavilion. It will be stored after it has cooled to dry under a pavilion, but nothing will be burned under that pavilion. So basically that was it. We talked about, again, our requirements. He did say that they like to burn early to get done between 7 and 8 a.m. I said, we don't open till 8. We don't issue permits till 8. So he's going to have to adjust that. As far as the storage of the wood that's going to be waiting to be burned, I've not been a part of seeing any of the building plans yet. I don't know what the sprinkler design is. I would have some concerns there. The main system I would be looking for in that, when you have anything with high combustibility, most of the time, and I can't speak for Sazerac or their architects, they would probably look at what's called an ESFR system, which is early suppression fast response sprinkler, which is bigger lines, bigger heads, puts out more water. We would look at that depending on the quantities that they would want to store. Now, if it's a stack or two, we've got barbecue places here in town that have more than that are in a regularly sprinkled building. We do regulate if they keep combustibles inside that it be a sprinkled building. This will be a sprinkled building. It just depends on what type of sprinkler. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate the explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Peace.
Thank you.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. This situation, it has truly been a good one for some people, and I realize it's a difficult one for others. When the final vote is taken, I know that we're going to have some people happy, and we're going to have some people that are very upset. During my time on the council, when issues come up, I pray about them, and I try to be fair and I put in a lot of time doing my research, and I put in a lot of time answering emails and answering phone calls from concerned citizens. And trust me, I've heard all of your concerns. I want to personally thank Mr. Ron Dennis for taking the time the other day for taking me to Jack Daniel's Distillery. We took lots of pictures there, and we both got to talk with a gentleman that his building was very much affected by so much of the fungus. And he said that people have learned in Lynchburg just to live with it because they know it brings in a lot of revenue. And George Dickel was visited, and the fungus isn't as bad there. I found it was interesting at Jack Daniel that there was a lot of thick fungus on trees close to the distillery and further back. And for council members, I brought some of the twigs, and it's like fur that sticks on the trees. I found it interesting that at Jack Daniel and at George Dickel, that right next to the trees that had a lot of fungus, a tree exactly next to it had no fungus at all. So in my feeble mind, I just came to a conclusion that they feed on some trees and they don't feed on others. And supposedly Jack Daniel is a huge operation, and that's why the fungus travels so far. And George Dickel is not as large as Jack Daniel, and it doesn't travel that far. And the distillery that wants to come here is about 1/3 the size of George Dickel, which was the smallest distillery visited. So, you know, when you look at the fungus, it's different at places, but since the distillery that's coming here is going to be the 3rd size of George Dickel, I don't really see a problem with that right now. But as I recall last week, there were concerns about the roads, and like Mr. LaLance has said, that has been addressed, and the fungus, the building size, it has been addressed, and traffic, and possibly if we can get speed bumps, put speed bumps out there once we get up and operating. I think that'll be a good idea. And another thing was the health hazard. And in listening to the experts that have come, and that's the only thing that I can go by, that there does not seem to be a problem. And an email sent today stated that lots of the neighbors would not be here tonight because they feel like it's a done deal. But I guarantee you that is not the case. When I left here last week, my mind definitely was not made up, and I did a lot of research since then. And the second thing was, only part of the neighbors were notified when the notification went out, and I did research that, and I was told that that was standard procedures, how far we went out with the notification. So I guess in the future, that's something as a council we may need to look into, extending our notifications. I definitely believe in giving back to my community, and I was concerned with the company giving back in our community. I received an email. I found the email to be very interesting, that the company has given $1.2 million to communities around different places, and I thought that was good. And if we do vote to let the distillery come here, I would expect you all to do the same thing in our community. And another concern I have, but I need a representative from the company to address a concern I have. Can I get a representative? Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you find, after you're up and running, if we vote to let you in, that the fungus has a tremendous impact or even a small impact on the neighbors' houses, would you all promise to hear the people, and will you promise to work with them to get the problem resolved?
Yes, so I can state myself as one of the distillers and John Lunn as our master distiller, this site will be our responsibility. We will be there on a daily basis, and we have an open door policy for not just the neighbors, but anyone in this community that has any types of concerns. We want them to come and talk with us and have an open dialect. And Sazerac as a company is committed to finding a reasonable solution to that.
Okay.
And we will take care of our responsibilities.
Okay, and when you get up and running, if we vote to let you in, I'm expecting you to keep your word.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Also in my research, I found where we have a lot of history, you all have a lot of history with working with universities, as an example, the University of Kentucky, where you have the Buffalo Trace Distillery. And I understand that you all want to work with our university, Middle Tennessee State University, and with our fermentation science department. And you all have already offered, if you come, MTSU students internship in your distillery and access to the facility for instructional purposes and potential employment to our students. Is that correct? Okay. I still wish I had my mom here, because when issues came up, we always sat down and talked about them. But before she died, she said, Madeline, on the city council, when the issues come up, pray about it, do your research, and leave your emotions out of your vote. So as a council member, I am prepared because I prayed about it, I've done my research, and I'm going to leave my emotions out of this, and I'm going to vote. Thank you.
Mayor, before we take the vote, I really appreciate the process we've been
been going through. Each of us have done a lot of soul searching and investigation on our own to look at the facts of this proposal. I prepared a statement, and because sometimes when I speak, I may not make all the points that I want to make, so I'm going to read my statement to you, and I know that's a little odd to do in the course of a city council meeting, but it makes the points that I want to make. First, I want to thank the city staff, all the citizens that phoned and have emailed me. I think I've probably gotten more phone calls and emails on this issue than I have anything since I've been on council. And certainly, I want to thank all the neighbors to the site. I've been to your area for about 4 or 5 times, traveling through your neighborhood, and you have a wonderful community out there. I want to thank the applicant and their partners in this project for contacting me and providing their perspective, their opinions, and the information that we needed in the deliberating of this proposal. I have welcomed and appreciated everyone's perspective and opinion. While I know that each of us see this from different perspectives and evaluate the facts differently, we have had a respectful dialogue. And in the political climate that we're in today, that says a lot about our community. It says a lot about the process, our respect for each other. Most rezoning proposals boil down basically to 2 sides. One says that change is good, and one says change is bad. For me, however, there's a 3rd side that is very personal for me. As we come to vote, I want to share my thoughts and conclusions that I am at peace with regarding this proposal. And I promise you I have not come to this conclusion without a lot of thought and prayer. On City Council, each of us have to look at what comes before us in the light of our particular perspective, our knowledge, and our experience. This is the context for me. I have worked for years supporting ministries and organizations that help people that are dealing with the consequences of addictive behavior. All of us are aware that there are a myriad of negative results from substance abuse that impact communities, families, and individuals. Our town, Murfreesboro, is no different than the rest of the country. Rampant addiction is a growing problem which has huge costs financially and personally. I have seen people whose lives have been destroyed and even lost because of alcohol. I've had close friends and family members who have struggled to put their lives back together as a result of substance abuse. The challenges of recovery and piecing lives back together are complex and very difficult to comprehend for those that have no life experience with it. But the problem begins with someone, somewhere, producing. I know that this is just one facility, and if it's not here, it will be somewhere else. But this is the community I love and that I'm accountable for as a city councilman. I realize that I'm just one vote, but I am one vote. Ultimately, I have to vote my conscience, and my conscience won't allow me to face the people that I've tried to help, those that are battling for recovery, having voted for this facility to come to our community. We are a vibrant, growing community that has a variety of opportunities from which to choose our future. And I'm just not comfortable with this choice of branding my hometown. I know that all of my colleagues in City Council take their responsibility extremely serious, and I certainly will support the will of this council. I hope that you can appreciate my position, even if we've come to different conclusions.
Thank you, Councilman Shacklet.
I'll tell you, this is one of the more difficult votes that I personally have made in the 6 years that I've been up here on the council. I'm reminded back of when we discussed whether or not the expansion of the airport runway was a good thing for the Murfreesboro community. Ultimately, there was a compromise found, and I think that it's a phenomenal facility today, and I think it will continue to be. But it was an extremely difficult decision to make. I think back on when we first met to have a conversation about Sazerac. I never heard of Sazerac. I'd certainly never heard of Bedonia or whiskey mold or whiskey fungus. And we have all learned, we have all studied, we've watched every YouTube video I think there is that involves distilleries and fungus and mold, and we have tried to do the very best investigation we can to make sure that we're protecting the health of our citizens, to make sure that we're doing what's best for Murfreesboro at the end of the day, because it's not always about me. It's not always about one individual. We was elected to represent the city of Murfreesboro and do and make the decision that we feel is best for our city. I've been asked several times, would you want this in your backyard? And when I look at the landfill situation that we have in Murfreesboro, when I look at some of the apartment complexes that I see adjacent to people's property and in their backyard, I can only look at it and think, well, if this were my option, yes, I would definitely take this over some of the options that are available. But change is hard. It's always hard, especially when you've got an open space and a beautiful lake back there. And I think this is one of the opportunities that that open space will continue to be a very attractive, well-maintained facility. It's an opportunity that has been presented to the public to look at a planned development. Oftentimes when somebody builds a house next door to you, I can probably guess that I'll speak for myself. My neighbors didn't come and ask me when they were putting a house next door to me if I liked the color of it, if I liked the size of it, or if I liked the sound of their car. I didn't get that option, but when it's a planned development, it has to be built exactly as it's proposed. And so I think we've been given a good proposal. I think Sazerac has, from the very beginning, done their part to try and communicate and make sure that the public was aware, even when emotions were so high that they didn't want to hear what they had to say. And I think that goes back to the very beginning. There was so many concerns and so much passion that I think there was an unwillingness to listen. And but I do think that as the dialogue has gone on, and I think that the situation has improved, and I hope it will continue to improve, because I do think that if Sazerac is approved, that they will be a good neighbor. I certainly hope that they are, and again, this has been a tough one. It's been an educational one, but I think the will of the council will hopefully be what is right, and we'll see how it works out.
Thank you, Councilman Smotherman.
I'd like to make one more comment and this is for Mr. Whitaker. We talked up here, and this is actually Ms. Kels Harris brought this up about the speed bump, and it's something I think I talked to you about a week or so ago. I think at some point or another we discussed whether or not we'd be willing to do things like speed bumps in areas where we thought speed was a problem. I think that we decided we would, but what do you need? I think it'd be a really good idea to do that there, kind of in front of those houses during the construction phase, to have some kind of mechanism in place to slow the big traffic down, the machinery, like dump trucks or whatever's the best thing I can come up with right now. But that would assure that they're not coming down that straightaway right to in front of where they're going to go through those 4 or 5 houses there, before they make the turn. What process do we have to go through to make that happen? If it's the will of the council, it certainly would be. I'd be in favor of it. But is that something that you deal with, Rom, us?
Well, we did a traffic calming study and came back with a program that
That's what I guess I'm remembering. I remember something like that.
I'll be happy to try to answer that, and actually, it's more in line with the city engineer who happened to be sitting beside of me. But typically, we discourage putting them in, especially on public streets. And I'll probably hear a grunt out of him if I'm wrong, but I would think he would want to answer that. There may be a case, in my opinion, because on Asbury, because there's very few cars. I don't know the entrance of that, in my opinion, would be a good place because it is a public street. There is.
No, not the entrance, down by the houses. So what I had in mind was when you come down and kind of around that curve, right about the time you start on that straightaway.
Right.
I'm thinking right in there.
And we've had numerous.
I'm not an engineer, but
right.
You know,
I'll let
We asked
Mr.
this-
Griffith answer that, but it's typically not something that we like to do on public streets.
Mr. Griffith, could I just, and not to stop you, I think listening, we've heard the neighbors saying during the construction phase that this is a concern, and surely there's got to be some way, if the neighbors have asked for that, and this is something that passes, that we can find. I see them all over in the subdivision I'm in every day in Williamson County. The homeowners association bought these temporary speed bumps and put them out to slow down cars on the thoroughfare. So surely I would think, although this may not be in our long-term traffic calming plan where we've got to have neighbors know that there's a speed bump next to their house, can we do something, come up with some kind of plan that would address that?
I want to make a comment, and the reason I do is part of it's common sense, and part of it is the fact that for years people have asked, can we put them next to school zones? And we have continuously told people that we don't put speed bumps on roadways in Murfreesboro because it slows down the emergency response vehicles. But more than that, I want you to think of this logically. If you've got a dump truck going over a speed bump, do you really want to hear the banging of that truck crossing that speed bump every time it hits it versus us putting a couple police officers out there and controlling the traffic speed that way without that I mean, if you've got a manhole cover in front of your house and it's not perfectly balanced, every time a vehicle crosses it, you hear it. And with a speed bump and this type of equipment going across that, I'm not sure the neighborhood wants to hear dump trucks crossing with tailgates slapping and carrying on. I'm not sure they want to hear that, but that's...
Can Mr. Griffith, can y'all come back as you are knowing that this could possibly be a concern and this goes through site plan, if it does pass, that could be something that y'all would address?
Absolutely. We could. There's a whole collection of traffic calming measures. That is one of the unintended consequences of speed humps, is they do cause a lot of noise. But we could certainly look at several options and bring those back and have those as possibilities.
I just think of driving down Regency Park Drive, and there's really not speed bumps. It's more drainage indentions that are like 2 or 3 spots there.
The water table, yes.
And, it doesn't necessarily make a noise.
I still got a knot on my head. Down there in Battleground.
It definitely slows you down as you're going down Banner or down Regency Park, because you've got those.
Yeah, the original speed dip, yes.
Yeah, speed bumps, whatever,
Sure.
something.
Chris, can we look at traffic control as well? Just having someone out there traffic control-wise, just like if we're working on streets or highways or anything like that, it may be a better option?
Sure, absolutely. That is one of the problems, making sure that we maintain attention to and so anything that we can put out there that's temporary, that's there, all the time, is beneficial. But certainly, some sort of type 3 barricades or something to just to make sure they know they're in a construction area.
Thank you.
For a truck driver who's speeding, a speeding ticket and a mark on his seat, commercial driver's license, that has a much deeper impact on him than a speed bump does. And so, I think we can get law enforcement to go out there and they're never unwilling to go out there and put the signs up. I think every 3 or 4 weeks I'll call them and say, hey, I've got a call about somebody speeding through a certain area, and the trailers get set up, and we try and address it now. Is it going to stop everybody? Never. I mean, if our goal is to try and change people's driving habits, that may be a bit unrealistic, but we can control the ones that regularly go through there, and those drivers are going to be in there day in and day out. And I think it can be controlled without the bumps, but maybe.
Well, certainly, we'll look at some options. And
Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
so,
Thank you. I just got a couple of comments. One, this is one of the reasons that we go through the process. I started getting phone calls on this when it started going through Planning Commission, and I was honest to tell the people who called, I haven't even seen the proposal yet. It needs to go through Planning Commission. And, that's really why we hold 2 public hearings. We don't have to hold a public hearing at the council or at the council level. We don't have to hold a public hearing at the Planning Commission level, but we do that as a second, sort of a second fail-safe to be able to hear. So, over these last months, I think all of us have tried to, as best we can, in a good way, to become whiskey experts. And so I called, after we had the meeting on Thursday, I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to find out some of the communities that have these. So I called and I spoke with the mayor of Moore County, and Sloan could not have been nicer. So I asked him all the questions, that the neighbors had asked, and really trying to get, we've seen all these pictures, and you're trying to get to where you're comparing apples to apples. So I said, how many barrel houses do y'all have? He said, we have 100 barrel houses in a 2-mile radius. Okay, how many barrel houses do your barrel houses, or how many barrels do y'all hold? He said, well, our new facilities will hold anywhere between 70,000 to 90,000 barrels per house. On average, we're somewhere around 45 to 50,000 barrels. So I start doing the math on that, and I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that there's over millions of barrels that are in Lynchburg right now? He said, yes. He didn't know the exact number, so I pulled up on Google Earth and I start sort of measuring out where all these barrel houses are. And I mean, they are literally all over Lynchburg. So I said, well, do y'all have the fungus issues? And he said, well, I can tell you from the years I've been here, I don't really get a lot of complaints. Obviously, the distillery was here before we were here, or before a lot of the things were here, but we don't have a huge issue. He said, now I'm standing out in front of the courthouse right now, and I can look up, and I can't tell you if it's from whiskey or it's just an old courthouse, but yeah, we've got some staining up here. So I said, well, what about smell? He said, well, the smell, I'm not going to tell you that when they distill and they make that we're not going to smell it. But he said they burn every day, and they're distilling nonstop every day. It's a huge operation. So I said, okay, so you're saying that 80,000 barrels compared to millions of barrels is not that big of a deal. He said, I'm not going to tell you that, but that wouldn't concern me. So then moved to go to look at George Dickel. George Dickel's 250 to 300,000 barrels on site. Their barrel warehouses are 2 stories. And then it just so happened, as I was looking at the Google portion, there's a house, found out that it's listed. It's listed by a local realtor here in town. So I call the local realtor and say, have y'all had any objections to this house that's for sale? He said none. So I asked, have they had any issues? Whiskey mold on the house? None. So a realtor that's telling you that has to sign a property disclosure form, that's a big deal. So then from there, going through and saying, the same realtor says, well, we've got houses listed in Lynchburg, not really had any issues. So the thing I think at the end I've looked at, and it really reminded me of this of last week, and Eddie brought it up. I'm glad you brought it up. I opened my garage last Tuesday morning. I live on the north side of town. I'm 2.5 miles from the landfill, and I open up my garage, and the first thing I smell in the morning is that landfill. Now, Republic can say that the landfill doesn't stink, but I'm telling you, I smell the landfill from 3 miles away. And I had a great conversation before this meeting with Mr. Banker, and going through sort of the pros and what I felt like were some of the cons. And, I think we've got the traffic in place. I think the traffic and the road that's going to be in place, he thought that that the traffic for their distillery was going to come through the neighborhood, and that's not going to happen. That's coming through the Cherry Lane extension. There's more traffic that would be generated by a subdivision going behind this property without that road than would be with this use coming through. So I think at the end of the day, I think that the city's done everything that we possibly can. I think that, I drove by Bunny Bread today. That facility's been there, I don't know how many years. It was here way before I got here. And I thought back, have we ever gotten a complaint from the Bunny Bread facility? And to my knowledge, I've never gotten a complaint on the Bunny Bread facility or any of the buildings that are around there. So, and you drive through, you look at the new bank that's built there, you look at the gateway that's built there, and we've just not seen that. So, in my opinion, I told Mr. Banker that, I don't think any of us, I don't ever plan on leaving Murfreesboro, and I don't think that I want to walk around and see people that I voted on something 10 years ago and feel like I have to hide. And, I look back at the decisions that we've made. For me, being here since 2002, I can't think of any decisions that we've made that we've intentionally said. Now, we've made some poor decisions on road alignments and things like that you can look back and say, man, we should have done that one different. But as far as looking at projects that have come through, I can't remember one person who's called me and said, y'all killed my property value on this. Most of the time, it goes through the process, and the reason it goes through the process is because it ends up with a good outcome. So, and I think that's what's happened in this process. Anyone else?
If there's no more comments, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
No.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now consider for approval a renewal of certificate of compliance for retail liquor store for Sanjay Kumar A. Patel at Murfreesboro City Limits Liquors and Wines at 5353 Northwest Broad Street.
Mayor, this is the applicant's 2-year requirement by the state of Tennessee, and his application for the certificate of compliance meets our requirements, and I recommend approval.
Okay, everything's in order?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll consider recommendations of the city engineer regarding proposed Northwest Extension, Advanced Planning Report, West Lytle Street Improvements Phase 2 project change order, and proposal for the design of the North Boulevard extension. Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. I do have 3 items tonight. The first item is the proposal for the Northfield West Extension, advanced planning report for that. The recently adopted 2040 Major Thoroughfare Plan recommends extending Northfield Boulevard from Broad Street to Thompson Lane. To further review this roadway extension and its impact on the traffic in the area, staff has requested and HDR has submitted the attached proposal to conduct a planning study to evaluate the project. The study will evaluate alignment options, traffic analysis of this road extension and its impact on adjacent intersections, hydraulic analysis, and cost of the proposed roadway bridge section. HDR proposes to perform this for a not-to-exceed amount of $81,697, which will be funded from this year's and next year's State Street aid. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Griffith, we've had, obviously a lot on our plates this week, and so I'm not quite as prepared on this, but so on this item, basically what you're asking for is just the money to do the engineering for the, and you're talking about the bridge over top of the, this is to do the engineering for the bridge?
This is actually
just the part that that's by Vanderbilt.
Yeah, no. This, and I apologize. There's 2 Northfield items on here, and they probably confusing. This is just for a planning report, basically just to confirm that we need the project. I know there's been some question, and really just in our mind, we want to see what the impact of this project would be with over the railroad, over the river, and the connection to Thompson Lane, see what the impact of it would be at Thompson and Broad, see what the impact may be back at Medical Center Parkway and Broad Street. So this is really just a more detailed study of the original study that was done in the 2040 major thoroughfare plan.
All right. I'll move for approval.
Yeah, anything that improves the traffic flow on Memorial, but Old Fort Parkway, this would help. It would also help with Thompson Lane situation, it'll help with the Broad Street situation, and it's going to help with Medical Center Parkway. So I think it'll be a tremendous help if we can get this roadway crossing. I think that was the whole 2040 plan, was we have to improve our east-west movement in our city, and this is to reach that goal. So I'll second this motion.
All right, we have a motion
And a second.
and a second. All right.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Mr. Griffith.
The second item is change order number 1 to the West Lytle Street Improvements Phase 2 project. The City Council approved the construction of this project for West Lytle Street from Barker Street to Church Street on June 16th of 2016. This project consists of bike lanes, sidewalks, curb and gutter, drainage pipe, asphalt, water and sewer lines, and underground utilities. Jarrett Builders was awarded the contract, and this change order is intended for the following items: the removal of the final asphalt topping quantity, including permanent striping, and the fence items. These items will be removed from the current contract with Jarrett Builders, but will be installed under the annual maintenance paving contract for FY19 and paid from the state street aid. There's been a lot of cuts to the roads outside the initial project limits, and we want to make sure that those are addressed. We feel like that's is done better with the annual paving contract. We've also added 345 feet of 42-inch storm drainage pipe on Burton Street to serve as a better drainage system for the downtown area to the east of this location. And then finally, the addition of decorative pedestrian lighting around the new judicial building, including Lytle Street, Maple Street, Church Street, and Burton Street. The work includes for the installation of conduits, transformer pads, and 13 concrete bases for the lighting. The project is currently funded by the TML loan or bond issue, and partially by the Rutherford County as part of their judicial building project. The project costs will also now be funded by the FY19 state street aid and $50,000 from the stormwater user fee for the additional storm drain pipe. The contract price will increase by $122,900.88 from $5,244,688.96 to $5,357,589.78. This includes the credit of items removed and also the additional work. We recommend your approval of this change order and additional 60 days added to the contract. With that, I'll answer any questions you have.
That completion date, is that, it says July 2nd, is that the 60 days, or is it?
Yes, it's July 2nd. Yes, it was originally in May, and then the additional works pushed that out. But all the work will be completed, except for the surfacing, will be completed around the judicial building for its opening.
Super. Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Final item is the one that Mr. LaLance had mentioned previously. This is actually for the design of the section of Thompson Lane that was part of the Vanderbilt University Medical Center land purchase. Staff recommends proceeding with the design of Phase 1, which would actually be just from Garrison Drive to Thompson Lane. We've requested and received a proposal from Energy, Land, and Infrastructure to perform the design services, which includes about 1,650-foot long 5-lane section with curb and gutter, closed storm drainage, and pedestrian facilities. ELI proposes to complete the design for a not-to-exceed fee of $45,020, with funding for the design will come from the sale of the property to Vanderbilt. With that said, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions?
There's no question. Make the motion to approve.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Rick. Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you.
Have a couple of beer permits.
Yes, Mayor, we do. We have a new location for a club to be opened at 440 Rice Street. That's a private club for an on-prem.
No, I'm sorry. Item 10 has been pulled. I should have said that, but yeah, item 10 has been pulled. Sorry, I did not
That's
mean
okay.
to interrupt you.
That application is in order, but they do need to finish getting their building codes inspections completed. Additionally, we have a restaurant at 2839 Medical Center Parkway for an on-premise new location permit. That application also is in order, but they also need to finish their building codes inspections. So if these are approved tonight, we would issue those permits once they are have satisfied all the building codes inspections. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions?
So move.
Second.
Motion second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have no board and commissions, no payment of statements. We have one item of other business that Mr. Ives has for a right of entry on the St. Andrews school site.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman, council members. A short item. As you know, the council has authorized the acquisition of a site for a school off of at the intersection of St. Andrews and Veterans Parkway. We have arranged for a right of entry from the landowner so that we can go onto the site and complete surveys, some soil testing, and that sort of thing. So we're asking your authority, your authorization of city manager to sign this right of entry agreement so that we can get that work underway. This is time critical because of our need to try to have that school ready for the fall of 2019. Would also let you know that there will be a few, 2 or 3 contracts executed in the near future. We anticipate by the city manager for the surveying, for some geotechnical work and for some environmental services. We anticipate those to be well within the city manager's authority. And of course, if there's something larger than that, we'll be back to you. So with that, I'd ask your approval of this right of entry.
Any questions? All right, can I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Any other business?
Mayor, 2 dates to make sure are on your calendars. Open house for 1004 North Highland Avenue, the new police headquarters, Sunday, April 29th. Police department families are going to get the tour on Saturday, the 28th, but our open house for the general public will be on Sunday, the 29th.
Time?
1 till 5. We'll have the building open all afternoon. Then on May 1st, you're scheduled for meeting with the executive search firm at 1 p.m. And then we'll come behind that and follow that with a budget update and review. I think we'll be ready to share a continuation budget with you and then a number of improvement packages for your consideration.
That'll be after that 1 o'clock?
After that. We'll keep you for the afternoon, basically.
What was that date again? I'm sorry.
Budget review after the meetings with
Okay.
SGR.
Okay.
The meeting starts at 1.
SGR is at 1 o'clock.
Budget.
Right after that. Okay, any other business? We'll stand adjourned.